Today, what's new and different in Firmware 2.0 for Nikon's powerhouse Z9. We'll also talk about getting better, more detailed prints with upresed images using ON1's just about to be released brand new Resize AI software. It's pretty cool. Well, hey everyone, Hudson here. Welcome to this week's video. We're going to talk about firmware. We're going to talk about some really cool new software, particularly for people who like to print like I do and have old images that aren't as high in megapixels as maybe you want, or you've had to crop really heavily on the image you'd like to print bigger. ON1's created some really cool stuff. They were #1 in that business with genuine fractals, and then ON1 Resize, now Resize AI, takes it up yet another notch. So we'll talk about that. I'll give you some examples. I'll even do a print and a little side-by-side comparison. I will talk firmware stuff with the Z9. I'm going to talk about it briefly. Next week, I'm going to go into real detail about the one function that I think all the still shooters in this community should pay attention to and maybe change their setting. Just one little thing. Most of the enhancements in this come in the form of video. I'll talk about that at the end of this video. And you can link to it in this video's description. You just click on the show more or the video's title and look at the full description, and there's a chaptered out table of contents. If you want to skip to that, it's right there. I want to make sure everyone knows office hours this Tuesday, April 26th, 10 a.m. Pacific, and we're really lucky to have David Archer with us. It's a big group free-for-all meeting, and David's going to talk. He's a master birds and wildlife photographer and action photographer, and he's going to talk about some of the lessons that he's learned and the tips and methodology that he uses to capture such amazing images of wildlife and birds in particular. So when you sign up for that at hudsonhenry.com/office hours, make sure you leave a question if you have one on shooting action, motion, wildlife, birds. This is a great time to ask that question. We'll take your questions live, Rick, David, Woody, Darren, and I. And it would be fun to see your face in the Zoom session if you can sign up for Zoom. You can also watch it on YouTube Live. So sign up again, hudsonhenry.com/office hours. Tuesday, April 26th, 10 a.m. Pacific. I hope to see you there. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is ON1's Resize AI. We'll talk about the Z9 firmware stuff at the very end of the video, and I've got a whole video next week about what you need to know as a still shooter. But let's talk about Resize AI and where it fits into your editing workflow, what you would use it for. You know, people often ask me a lot about sharpening, a lot about noise reduction, a lot about, where to do those things. And I would say that in 99% of my images that I capture, I don't really worry about that because I'm only going to be displaying them via a digital medium. If you're putting it up on a screen, if you're sharing it on social media, you're never really going to notice that much unless it's really noisy, whether or not you've done sharpening and noise reduction, whether or not you've upresed the image. I have images that I shot back with my old Nikon D70, my first digital camera. They're 6 megapixels and they look great on a big digital screen. Printing them big is a whole nother story, okay? A lot of my portfolio images come out of my Nikon D200 and D700 that I had before I got the larger resolution Nikon D800. And those files, when you want to print them large, you really need to add resolution. And that's where this software comes in. It's really, to me, something that's part of my printing workflow, and it comes at the end after you've done all the editing, after you've really refined the image, after you get it soft proofing, you're getting ready to print it, upres it, or maybe right before you soft proof it. It's before or after soft proofing. It's the last thing you're going to do is you bring it into this software and you increase the resolution, and you can in many cases increase the resolution up to 400 times with this software. I've seen some demos that were just astounding. So I got a pre-production version of this. It's going to be releasing really soon. There's a link in this video's full description to buy it. If you use that link, it helps me out, along with links to all the other stuff that I talk about. But at any rate, let's check it out. Let's see what this software is capable of. All right, so we're here in Lightroom. I've got some images from years gone by that I think could really, really benefit if I'm going to print them large from running them through ON1's Resize AI 2022. There are images where either I didn't have quite enough long enough lens, like this wonderful prothonotary warbler that I photographed with David Archer in South Carolina a few years back, or I was working with the D500, which is, a smaller megapixel camera. Maybe I want to print this image much, much larger, or it was a long time ago when I was working with my Nikon D700, which, while one of the greatest cameras that I've ever used, was only 12 megapixels. And you know, where are we using this for? We're using it, I think of this really for print. You know, if I go full screen with this and you have a look at it, this image from Zion, some of the first snows hitting in the fall, you know, this image is nice and sharp. There's no way, this is a big 30-inch screen that I'm recording right here. It looks beautiful. You know, you could put this large on a television, digital presentation. There's no need to be sharpening and upresing and worrying about it. It's when we go to print that that getting more resolution really matters. That translation to ink on paper, you know, for me is what I'm excited to go ahead and use Resize AI for. So let me just show you how I would do it as a plugin from here within Lightroom. So I would go File, Plugin Extras, and then run down to ON1 Resize AI. Now this is going to become a part of Photo Raw in the future here, but you know, it also works as a plugin if you're working in other software, Photoshop, you know, Capture One, I know Lightroom and Photoshop for sure. So you jump in here and you've got your export options. It's going to create a new file. You can also work on the original. You know, these are to be done at the last stage before you go to print, okay? So this should be done on your finish edited image. And what we're going to do here, well, let me back out for a second. Let's see how big a file this is in the first place. If I go into my loop view, I'm hitting the E key to get my loop view. I could click this little icon right here to get out of grid and into loop. But I'm going to have a look with the I key for information. That's my shortcut. You can see, you know, it's only 2,832 pixels high. I mean, that will print fairly large, but let's see if we could upres this to where it prints at my big Epson 9900's native resolution of 300 dpi. Let's try to see if we could upres it to print at, say, you know, 24 inches, you know, to get a nice 16 by 20 or something. So let's go. We would go into the Plugin Extras menu and choose ON1 Resize AI, and that brings up a dialog. This is a Photoshop document. This is a long edited image. It's the final image. I could open it as the original, but I don't necessarily want to do that. I want to go ahead, I'm going to edit a copy with Lightroom settings. There might be some adjustments that I did in the develop module in Lightroom. I'm going to create a new file. I want it to be 16 bits. I'd like it to be in Pro Photo RGB. And we're going to go ahead and use a Photoshop document. So those are going to generally be my choices. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. It's going to generate a new file, and it's going to open it in Resize AI. And you can see, you know, we look at our fit view, we're looking at it just like we did over in Lightroom. There's some presets for different types of printing if you want. I'm going to go ahead and just close that down, given that I'm working out of a Lightroom print flow and we'll print out a Lightroom. I'm going to come in here and I've got different ways I can upres this. I could upres it by percentage, but let's go ahead and say long edge. It's at 14 inches right now at my native 300 pixels per inch or dots per inch of resolution. Let's take it up to 24, 24 inches. And we'll go ahead, set that in there, and all I have to do is go ahead and click, and we can sort of scroll around. We can move and have a look at this. There's a lot of detail. Now, granted, you know, we have just upres this. Let's look at percentage here. 170%. You know, let's have a look at what it would look like if we hadn't done this Resize AI. There's no, you see a lot more detail coming out in the rocks. It's really pretty incredible. You can grab this little button right here and see the before and after and run a slider across, and that's a really powerful way to have a look at what it's doing. That's just a straight up upresing if there was no Resize AI involved. And pulling this slider across just shows you the increased detail that the engine is getting. You know, and it's not doing anything negative in my sky. It's not giving me any janky artifacts or anything like that. If anything, it's making it look a little bit nicer. But when you look at that ridge line, it's really impressive as we drag that slider across. Then we come down, you know, let's look at some of the mid-grant. Wow. I mean, actually looking right in here, it's really pretty amazing. And you come down and you take a look at, you know, these foreground trees. It's handling detail really quite beautifully. There are going to be images, I've experimented with some particularly older images where maybe it wasn't quite as sharp as I remember it having been 20 years ago when I photographed it. And you may find some artifacts maybe from editing that you did that don't look great. You can always grab this smoothness slider and kind of take the edge off the effect, but you're also kind of reducing some of that brilliant AI sharpening that's going on. All you gotta do is hit done and it'll bring you right back into Lightroom with a baked in file with those settings. It's gonna bring it in, you see it's gonna take it a little time resizing and saving. I won't do this on every image. And in fact, I'm gonna wait. It takes it a little time. There's a lot of processing going on here. So I'll pop back to you when that is done. All right, boom, there it is. It did take some time. Now we have this 7200 pixel by 4790 pixel image. Now that's coming up to like 36 megapixels from, you know, what was shot on a 12 megapixel camera. Pretty darn incredible. And zooming in, you know, you wonder, is it gonna look better printed with this work done to it? I have no doubt. You know, it might look mildly edgy and over sharpened or a little whimsical, you know, zoomed into 100% on the screen. That's not the purpose of this for me. This is about getting a larger print and having it look good. Sharpening and display at 100% on the screen is a completely different thing than printing. We're after printing here, and we'll do a little test at the end of this to sort of see how this looks with Lightroom uprezing for printing, you know, doubling the resolution of an image compared to Resize AI. And I really have no doubt looking at this, which one's gonna win out. Let's look at a few others. We won't go through the whole process of saving them out, but you know, remember, when you wanna use this as a plugin out of Lightroom, you need to go down to plugin extras from the file menu and choose ON1 Resize AI 2022. That's the only way it's gonna round trip back in and automatically import your file in alongside the original. And in this case, I'm not even gonna create a copy. If I did, I would choose ProPhoto RGB, but instead I'm just gonna open the original because I'm gonna cancel it. I'm not gonna save any changes. I'm just gonna showcase, you know, how does it look. So we got this red colobus monkeys from the jungles of Zanzibar, the forests of Zanzibar, really rare endangered species. Photographed back in 2008, if I remember correctly, with a Nikon D200. And let's jump in here, do that long edge calculation again. We're gonna be going up more than 200% here by jumping up to 24 inches on the long edge. And let's have a look, you know, what is that doing with this image? Well, as it builds its preview, it takes a minute to build the preview, so always give it a second. We'll grab this slider and kind of move it through, and I really want you to watch the fur in this image as I come across. I mean, look at that detail just kind of bloom. Check out the eye as we come across and the reflection of the forest canopy. Ooh. Look at the hairs around the mouth. I guess you'd call it a mustache. These are really photogenic monkeys. And look at the fur up in the scalp. That just blows my mind. Look at that detail recovery. You know, I have no doubt that's gonna look just awesome. You can always soften the effect if you're working with an image that maybe has some noise or has some over editing and halos, and you're starting to see some artifacts that are kind of being enhanced by the software. You could go ahead and pull the smoothest slider and just tone it back, but in this case, it's just looking great. All right, we'll go ahead and cancel that. But you get the idea what that's doing. Here, on a subsequent trip to Africa in Lake Victoria, is an egret shot with my D700, a camera that a lot of my portfolio images came out of, that I wish were higher resolution. You know, I'm wishing I was working with the D850 or, you know, the modern Z9. That's kind of the photographer's conundrum. If only I had the tools and the skills that I have now back then. You know, I think the minute we stop thinking that way, we've stopped growing enough. But let's jump in here. Let's see what we can do. It's a beautiful, sharp, backlit image of this egret landing in Lake Victoria. Let's pump it up to 24 inches at max at the native resolution of the printer. It's going to take it a second for that preview to fully load, and I'm going to grab our slider while that's happening, and I'll take us off. You know, here's what it looks like. To the left is without, to the right is with. Look at the change as it comes across the bird's face, and then across the feathers in the head and the neck. This is some really cool stuff. Look at that little highlight feather wow, just, man, the feathers on the back, details, just amazing. Again, I think this is going to enable me to print this much larger. Let's jump in. Here's that same bird, believe it or not, taking off with a fish in its mouth. And I wasn't quite prepared for it to be moving as quickly as it was. So it's got a little motion blur. You know, as I said, you know, garbage in, garbage out. It's not going to save an image that's not sharp. This is going to just add resolution and detail at the same time. Let's open it up in here, see what we can do. I mean, this image is sharp enough for me. It's really sharp down at the bird's feet. It kind of became like a panning motion image. Let's go bump it up again and have a look at what it's doing to our image. Again, it takes it a minute to load this preview. There's a lot of processing going on. But we grab our slider, move it over, and then let's watch what happens as we come across. I don't think it's there. It's loaded. Look at that. Look at those water droplets. Watch right here as I move this slider across. That's really just ridiculous, the way it's bringing detail back despite enlarging. Let's look at the bird's face as we come across, and the fish. You know, there's some motion blur there, but wow. Yeah, awesome. Cool stuff. This is the racetrack in Death Valley, and let's take that in, have a look at it. I think this is, again, Nikon D700. We're going to jump in again to plug in extras on ON1 Resize. We'll open the original. This is a really nice sharp image of the racetrack on a cold day. And, you know, shot with the D700, but no cropping whatsoever. Let's make this 28 inches. Let's make sure we're going to 200%. And we'll let this preview load. Have a look here. If anybody hasn't been to the racetrack, it's well worth going. Yeah, look at the detail in that surface of those hexagons of the playa. And then as we move across, let's have a look at the rock, the sailing rock, the famous sailing rocks of Death Valley, the sailing stones. Wow, super cool. We just had such an awesome workshop in Death Valley a few weeks ago. I'm still kind of buzzing from it. What an amazing group of photographers. If some of you are watching this, I miss all you guys. It was a blast out there. What a place. All right, so you can just see, look at the detail enhancement. That's really incredible. You know, let's zoom up or scroll up and have a look at what's happening up, you know, higher in the sky. Has a lot of detail in this image. Again, it takes it a minute to load its preview, but we'll come across here and we'll have a look, you know, what's going on in the detail of Ubehebe Peak. Wow. Subtle, but you're gonna notice that in the print. Watch some of these little details of the rocks coming down that talus slope. You see where all the rocks from the playa are coming from. For having upres this, you can just see really is going to look great in print. You're never going to notice, you know, once again, if we go into fit view, you won't notice whether it's upres or not. If you're sharing this on a digital screen, it's going to look great either way, but if you're printing, that's where it matters. That's where all the sharpness flowing back along here on the trail of that sailing stone is going to make a huge difference. And, you know, I think all of these images that I have here, they're either old and lower resolution or cropped in or shot with a camera with a smaller sensor. You know, let's have a look at this. This shot might be emblematic. This is of a prothonotary warbler with David Archer. He was excited. This bird is rare. It's in Beidler Forest, one of my favorite places to photograph when we do our Charleston, South Carolina workshops. And you can see this is with a D500, which is a 20 megapixel camera to begin with, and then we're cropping significantly from it. So, you know, let's keep this crop. Let's jump in and let's see what kind of resolution we can get out of it. You know, I was sure to make sure that this was a nice sharp shot. David was so excited about the warbler. This is a raw file, so we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna make a copy to take into Resize AI. And I wanna make sure it's in ProPhoto RGB. That's my favorite editing color space because it's so wide, it's hard to make a mistake in there. 16-bit, high, you know, really great quality. Let's bring it on in. It's gotta create that new file. And we're bringing it in, let's look at it at 100%. Nice sharp image. And you can see it's less than 10 inches at my printer's native resolution. Let's bump it up to 24. We're going up like 250%. And as that preview builds, we'll grab our slider again, and we'll take it back over here. And that's without Resize AI. Let's see what it's doing to the image as it comes across the eye. Ooh. Just the detail and the little bits of feather there. You know, I wouldn't say that this image is perfect. It's sharp right where I want it, which is around the eye. But, you know, the beak, maybe there's a little motion going on. It's a dark forest, and I'm trying to keep my ISO down so it's not as fast a shutter speed as you might want, but the bird was stationary. So I'm going to say, though, that running this software on it versus just printing it large without the software is maybe more likely to make a big difference in this image than a lot of the other images that we just looked at. And again, you know, you take a look at it in a fit view, you're never going to know the difference, you know, with, without. It's when you zoom in and to 100%, which is what really matters when you print. You take a look at that detail that's coming into the feathers and coming into the eye. Let's have a look, you know. So I'm actually gonna go ahead, save this one out. I'll pop back to you, and I think this might be the one that we should print big and check at what it looks like with Lightroom and Adobe software doing the uprezing for print versus printing the one that we ran through Resize AI and made natively much higher resolution. All right, and here we go. We've got that Photoshop document back in here. It's 7200 by 5760 pixels as compared to our original 2900 by 2321. Let's see how many megapixels that is. And I've heard people ask me how I calculate that. And you just pull up a calculator and you multiply the pixel width by the pixel height. So 7200 times 5760. It equals 41 million pixels. So that's 41 megapixels we just created from a heavily cropped 20 megapixel file. And I think this is the guy that I actually want to go ahead and print. I'm going to select both of these. So the one on the left is the original. The one on the right is the new Resize AI version. I'm going to jump into our print module here. And I have a template set up for two 16 by 20 inch prints coming off my 44 inch roll feed of the Epson 9900 that I have here in the studio. And I'm gonna go ahead, just make sure we have the right settings. I have Epson Premium Luster photo paper in there, the 260 GSM, that's set. I'm in a perceptual rendering intent, that's probably, I'm not going through the whole proofing, we're just comparing one versus the other, and I think my kids will enjoy having these prints this evening. So we're print sharpening standard glossy. Let's just make sure that the printer settings are right. I'm going to go into properties. We're on max quality, roll paper 14 by 17. That's looking correct. And no color adjustment, that's being done by the software. So we're good. We say okay, and we'll go ahead and print. All right, and here it comes. Well, I gotta say that if you're back at a distance, like if I held this up to you or I put it on the wall and you were at a reasonable viewing distance, just like the digital file, you're probably not really gonna notice all that much of a difference. But your typical photographer's viewing distance is about as far as his nose or her nose is off her face. And when I come in and I look at this close up with my 2.0 readers on, the ON1 Resize AI image is significantly sharper. It just is. I know you can't see it from the video's perspective, but I'll show you just kind of a handheld Z9 200 or 105 macro view of these two images. You know, and our one on the right is significantly sharper, particularly around the eye and those feathers around the beak that are the only really crystal sharp part of this image since it's wide aperture. And we come over to the other image, and it looks good. You know, you wouldn't throw this print away, but it's not as sharp as that one where we used Resize AI. And really, you know, that's what it boils down to. Those of us who love to print tend to be pretty nitpicky about our prints. If it adds a quality of sharpness, there you go. I will say that I originally stumbled upon ON1 because I bought Genuine Fractals as a plugin to Photoshop. Long before I even used Lightroom, I was using Genuine Fractals as a method of uprezing images that I needed more resolution out of because it was the best engine out there. It blew away what Adobe was doing. ON1 built off that platform of Genuine Fractals. It eventually got renamed Resize. Now it's entering a whole new phase where it's Resize AI. And I think it deserves the accolades that it's getting. So I've got a link in this video's full description. You can download a free 30-day trial, or you can just buy the software. It works as a plug-in with your favorite editing app. Of course, it integrates right into Photo Raw and will eventually be integrated right into the full Photo Raw editing app. All right, so let's talk really briefly about the Z9 firmware. I promised that we would. The Z9 Firmware 2.0 is a huge buzz because of its filmmaking capabilities and because of some of its high-speed photography capabilities. The filmmaking ability that this camera now has with raw 8K video up to 60 frames a second, that's just nuts. And you know, if you're shooting that kind of video, you know, you need like 650 gigabytes just for 20-some minutes of video. Gerald Undone has a great video about what this camera is capable of with its raw pipeline of workflow. You know, for the type of work that I do in general, I'm very happy with oversampled 4K video. I generally shoot at 24 frames a second. I shoot some action at 120 frames a second. It's been mind-bending to me to have such high-quality 10-bit oversampled 4K in my initial test with this camera. The ability to go 8K raw is just, you know, it's more than I personally need. I'm not creating Hollywood productions to be viewed close up on a massive screen. But it's pretty impressive. Now for the still shooters out there, you know, there's some cool stuff. I haven't been able to run out and test the autofocus enhancements. I know it's supposed to work better in low light. I'm excited to be testing that. I'll be working with this camera in the Palouse on a workshop in just over a week, so I can report back after that on what I'm noticing with autofocus enhancement. I shot the heck out of it in Death Valley and Joshua Tree. So I will notice, and I worked a lot in low light, and there were times where it hunted and seeked a little bit more than my Z6 II and Z7 II. So I'm hoping that that's what they've fixed. I will say that the pre-roll and post-roll capability, if you're shooting in those high-speed JPEG modes, whether the 30 frames a second at full resolution or the 120 frames a second at reduced resolution, I can see situations where that would be really handy. You know, let's say that there's some wildlife extravaganza happening. You know, sharks are attacking seals in this bay, and you're focused and waiting, watching a seal swim by you, hoping that maybe a shark's gonna hit it. I mean, it's kind of macabre, but you're hoping that you're gonna get this amazing action photo, and you've got the shutter button half pressed, and the shark hits it, and you press the button to capture 30 or 120 frames of JPEGs per second. Well, the ability for that to back up and capture a second before you hit the button and capture a couple seconds after you let off, that's pretty cool in that situation. I could also see it for those who are trying to capture the bullet entering and leaving the apple after someone fires the gun, or the baseball coming right off the bat as the batter hits the strike. You know, so you know that's the kind of the situation that you use it in. For me, for most of what I do, I love raw files, and 20 frames a second is plenty fast for me, and I shoot in lossless 20 frame per second raw when I'm shooting action. And that pre-roll, post-roll thing, you know, generally I'm tracking a target. I know when to hit the button, but I can see situations. Now, what really is useful is recall shooting function hold. That's a new thing that you can map to a function button. Recall shooting function was something I was about to do a video about anyway. It's something that one of the members of this community pointed out to me who'd been a D5, D6 user. It was something I wasn't aware of that can really help with the ability to jump into a mode like action when you're just running around in your shoot around mode and all of a sudden there's a surprise, there's an amazing piece of wildlife out there. Well, this button will enable you to tap it. I mapped it to my function 1 button already. You touch it and it suddenly throws it into the settings that you predictate. So when you go into your control setups, I reprogrammed function 1, I chose recall shooting hold. And you can go in, the right arrow on that, and select a whole bunch of features. Like I've chosen it to be shutter priority, 1600th of a second, auto ISO starting at base ISO, 3D tracking mode, you can say animal or auto subject detection, and whether you want 20 frames a second, 10 frames a second, single frame. So I put 20 frames per second. And that automatically, if I just touch that button, suddenly that's the shooting mode I'm in. I'm shooting the bird that flies in unexpectedly. Tap that button again, I'm back in my knock around aperture priority single frame shooting out in the street type mode. That's super handy. I will show you exactly how to do it and why it's so cool in next week's video. All right, so once again, thanks everybody for watching. Links to everything I've been talking about, including a cool video about that Gerald Undone did on the video capabilities of this camera. A link to our office hours sign up at hudsonhenry.com/office hours. That's this Tuesday, talking about birds and wildlife and action shooting. David Archer will take some of your questions, so send those in. He's a master. I want to thank everybody who's been using my links to buy stuff online, that's always available at hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. Those links help me out and I thank you. And I want to thank everyone who's been liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. You make a big difference. Clicking that subscribe button helps too. So thanks everybody. I hope you've all been staying safe, enjoying kind of the change of season. It's been wet and rainy here in the Pacific Northwest, but that's what makes it so green and beautiful. So I hope everyone's getting out there, staying safe. We'll see you next week.